Right then, so we've had this mailbag question from Paul Cage, and he's wanting to talk about Doctor Who, but also some of the culture war stuff that's been going on. So I'm going to have my co-reviewer, the Core, in on this one, because he knows more about the show than I do. I tend to talk a bit more about the culture war stuff, so I'm going to have a bit of an intro for that first, then we'll move on. So today on this channel we're going to be talking about wokery in entertainment. Now this is nothing new, we've been talking about this on this channel for a while. This unfortunately is the state of things right now as it stands, and one of the platforms that has been used within the culture war has been popular entertainment, popular culture. So where I didn't really want to turn this channel into something that would be going there as frequently as we've been doing. But then again, I didn't want a lot of the franchises that I've been following with this channel, the entertainment franchises, to also be repackaged and repurposed. So in that context, I'm going to present some discussions here today about certain franchises. And this comes off the back of a mailbag request in which I was asked to talk about Doctor Who, funnily enough. Not a show that I watch. I did when I was a kid. I enjoyed it then, but it's not really for me. But in more recent times, that franchise has become something that has seemingly fallen to wokery and identity politics, that kind of thing. So, like I say, it's important that we make sure that we're getting context right and that we don't allow the argument to be twisted, because a lot of the time when identity politics is used, be it the racial side of things or the gender thing, or whether it's to do with trans issues, all that kind of stuff, you'll have valid points, but then your opponents will say, well, you're a racist or a transphobe or a homophobe or a sexist. The things that you're saying have been purposely twisted, as I say, to tactically destroy you as an enemy. So we need to be careful that we're not going to fall into any traps here. We're very clear that, for example, if we were criticising the female Doctor Who, again, I don't have a dog in that race, I don't watch the show anyway, that we're not saying we don't want a female lead in something. What we're talking about is a weaponisation of identity politics. That's what we're opposed to, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, with that, let's get into it.
Game face on when I chase like that, yeah, I play so strong with a knife in the back. I'ma swing home run like a baseball bat. Gonna see me rise, you can hate on that. I don't play both sides, doing me no cap. I'ma ride or die for my dreams on tap. I'ma fly real high, you ain't seen me stack.
So I was sent a mailbag request to talk about Doctor Who and some of the stuff that's going on with that. Now, one of the head guys at Doctor Who is a guy called Russell T Davies, from what I understand, and he was interviewed recently by the mainstream media. This was a screen grab that I was sent, hence it's got a bit of detail at the bottom. Ignore that. So it comes from a news article, and in this they were interviewing Russell T Davies and talking about finding a new generation of TV writers. Davies thinks that too many new recruits are just too angry in recent times. I do a lot of mentoring, and there are voices wanting to be heard of any gender or ethnicity who consider themselves invisible. They hate the media that ignores them, and they are trapped into wanting a job in that medium purely to increase representation. I read their scripts and they are rubbish. They don't actually love television, so they don't know how to write for it. So continuing with the BBC, there's been a lot of conversation about some of the wokery that's been going on behind the scenes there, but that's nothing exclusive to the BBC. This is across the board. But recently there was a video on GB News where Liz Kershaw from the BBC, or formerly of BBC Radio 2, I think, was talking about some of the diversity hiring situations that they've had there. She's kind of talking about it as both a negative and a positive, so she was being quite open and honest about it. But what she had to say was quite interesting.
So the next thing was that they recruited June Sarpong as the diversity czar, 180 odd £1,000 a year for 3 hours a week. And they would then issued this diktat that 20% of on-air people, whether they were presenters or guests, had to be non-white. And managers would not get promoted or their bonuses unless they achieve those targets. And that is what is going on now. Now, I think it's a good thing, because there was a time when the only black faces you saw at the BBC were the commissionaires on the desk.
So she's making some interesting points, and obviously part of that comes from a point of view of kind of equalising things from bygone eras where things were pushed the other way. Obviously, that makes sense, but we see further than that. We see this real hatred of the West and Western culture, which, when you look at it, is rooted in something called critical theory and cultural Marxism. This is where basically we see Marxism in all of its failures in the earlier part of the 20th century. A lot of it was based on the haves and the have-nots. Didn't really sell as much in the West because we all had things. We had hot water, we had electricity. So this other alternate branch of it that was kind of founded on the understanding that Marxism had failed based its new ideology rather than being the haves and the have-nots, but the oppressor and the oppressed classes. And what we've seen in more recent years is a real boom of that kind of mindset and ideology and agenda as well. A lot of this is done knowingly. A lot of what's been preached is knowingly incorrect. But they're training people, especially from a young age, to hate Western culture. And we are seeing it in the entertainment industry, in a lot of what children are consuming on things like Disney Plus. This that I'm playing for you here is something that's come out very recently. Let's play a bit of the audio from this. It's sickening.
Which means slaves built this country, and we demand our 40 acres and a mule. Bump that! You can keep the mule.
Keep the 40.
We're taking our freedom.
So as I say, absolutely disgusting and despicable. Now, I wouldn't be so put off by people talking about racial equality if it wasn't coming from such a dark place. Most people are just wanting to go along to get along, supporting the current thing. But when we really look at these movements, we always find Marxism, cultural Marxism specifically, as a movement. Things like this, as we see here, anti-racism. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. Angela Y. Davis wrote that. That's widely held as being attributed to her. Well, look at her background, being a member of the Communist Party, a feminist, a Marxist. Not good. And this really does come down. It cascades down through people like this. But at the top, you tend to find it comes from these large people and organizations, whether it's George Soros or the World Economic Forum. They have bragged personally about how they are pushing these agendas, the identity politics in entertainment, especially on children. It's not that we have a problem with there being gays or blacks or whatever. In movies, it's the weaponization of the identity politics for divide and conquer, so you can have this new world order they talk about. This isn't conspiracy theory, they talk about it. In fact, here, let's look at it.
Normalizing LGBTQ folks, including us in all stories. So that's the other piece that I think is really important. And we've worked really closely with Hollywood on.
So, of course, it's not just the entertainment industry. We've also got education, we've got big tech, we've got the medicine industry, big pharma. All of that stuff seems to have been compromised by this agenda that's been going on. Now, this is something that we do track on Brand X Reviews with our channel, but also an affiliated website that we have. If you want to go to brandxreviews.com, there's a redirect. We can get further into that. The point of this video here today is to talk about the stuff with Doctor Who specifically, and kind of what's been going on with that in this context. So here
This video is going to kind of be all over the place, like topic wise and tonally. 1 minute I'm talking serious, then I'm on Skype with you, goofing around. Okay.
Yes.
Exactly. So we've got the core here with his signature opening line there. Before I get into it, I just sent you a clip. I'm assuming you've been an uncooperative bastard and haven't watched it. Did you see the clip that I sent you?
No, I haven't.
Right, yeah, I knew it, yeah. So it's from the Grammys, basically, and it's kind of doing the rounds. It's pretty funny. In fact, I'll just edit it in here, but basically, it was just another kind of indicator of the culture rot that we've got going on. We've got this, and again, I'm not into religion, but I call a spade a spade. It was pretty satanic. And obviously, I realise it's just a show. That's kind of how these things work. Don't take it at face value or whatever. But it was like really kind of taking the piss, like literally taking the piss, because it was Sam Smith and he's been doing music videos where he's getting pissed on or something, or drinking out of a urinal. And they're writhing around wearing like Luciferian like horns and stuff. And what makes it funny, because they can do that, that's fine. But then what comes on at the end of it is this thing that says sponsored by Pfizer. So it's like, this couldn't get any fucking worse. The timer of it just cuts away. A lot of people have been talking about it. I'll show you the clip later on, but I'll edit it in here.
I'll check, but that sounds like it's fake.
Here, let me send it to you.
I know it's too easy to make.
It's too easy to make. You're right. It is too easy to make.
Because
I want to believe it's real.
A lot of people. Well, hold on. Let's see.
The Grammys featured Sam Smith's demonic performance and was sponsored by Pfizer. It really is true.
Yo, that's random.
So Joe Rogan was talking about it as well, and you'll see what I mean anyway when you see the clip. But yeah, so we've been asked about Doctor Who anyway. So did you as much as see Paul's mailbag request?
Yeah, Paul, what the fuck? That was actually legible. Like, that's not how you're supposed to be doing these.
Yeah, I don't. He's got Lucy to write this. I'm sure. There's no way he's written this for himself. I'll read it out anyway. So I wanted to know your thoughts on recent comments from Russell T Davies. As you know, he's returned as showrunner for Doctor Who's 60th anniversary and slightly beyond, as we know for now. He's generally known as a top TV writer and coming up with some very progressive shows such as Years and Years and It's a Sin. So as a progressive writer, his comments could come as a shock to many, but thought you'd find it interesting to see what he has to say. Now, earlier in this video, before I brought you on, Car, I did mention the comments, so for context, that's been edited in. Presumably, you've read that. I imagine you'll have already read that.
Yeah, I mean, I know the comment fairly like off by heart at this point. I've like seen it a couple of times floating around. I mean, I think it is a definite sign that Sony have got more directive control over Doctor Who now than the fucking BBC, because you would not have seen that comment when the BBC were kind of...
That's interesting. This is why I thought it was a good idea to talk to you, because I don't know anything about it. What's that about with Sony and the BBC? Presumably Sony have got the rights to it now or something.
It's more BBC kind of ceded a lot of like control to get like Russell T Davies back after the like fucking ground it into the dirt with Chris Chibnall. That he like insisted on a lot of control being transferred over to it's Bad Wolf Productions or something, which is like it's a Doctor Who reference, like a Doctor Who thing.
Yeah.
And Sony have like bought out like Bad Wolf Productions, so they now have like a say in it, which is not necessarily a good thing because Sony is fucking shit. But at the same time, I think Sony are a little bit less kind of draconian than the BBC would have probably been.
Yeah. I imagine it's not that they're putting in anything controversial, but they're just not swamping it with identity politics, if they even did before. I mean, I don't watch the show, but from what I've seen, there's some...
I mean, it's a little bit like Doctor Who. There's a little bit like a little bit like Star Trek. There's always been a little bit political. Like, you know, some of the classic writers would kind of just include shit about whatever social topic was pissing them off at that point in time.
Yeah.
And that's like reasonable. But yeah, like I say, I don't think when the BBC was in charge, you'd have had the lead writer saying like, yeah, SJW writers are shit. Like, more or less.
Yeah. And this is always a point. I mean, you've said that before. I know that's one of your big things, that it wouldn't be so bad if these activists that are just basically using entertainment as a medium to just brainwash people, it wouldn't be so bad if the product that they were putting out was half decent. But the decline in quality is undeniable once you've got these activists pushing the message.
Well, like I say, that just seems to be a case of like, yeah, we'll put out the message, we'll put out the important stuff, and then we'll be so busy patting ourselves on the back, we don't stop to consider, well, is the message we've shared actually any good, or is it just going to piss people off because it was shit? And there's been like a very strong kind of like theme amongst like other like progressive things, like, well, you can't criticize anything like this because then you're seen as like, you know, against this, like, you know, kind of very progressive leftist kind of nonsense. So it's like, even if you are on the left and you absolutely hate this, like, you've still got to kind of toe the line because, you know, you need to be seen as like supporting these things. And it's like, I don't even think people who are heavily invested in the left are particularly liking these like really shittily written, kind of like half-assed, like not very entertaining shows. Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm pissed off because of, you know, I literally cannot stand the fact there's a gay person in it or something like that. It's not that. It's the fact that it's shit as well. Like, if it was decent, we wouldn't be noticing as much.
That was a point I was making in my intro. I was being very clear. That's why there's quite a long intro to this video, because I have to be really clear, not just so I don't get in trouble. Because there's something we really need to be observing here. We need to be like very conscious of this and be very clear on it, that when we're talking about minority groups being represented or whatever, we don't have a problem with that, with any example of that. What it is the weaponization of that to push a political agenda that they otherwise can't sell. It's the similar thing when you get the far right talking about grooming gangs and so on. It's like, nobody supports grooming gangs, but when we start to see far right people, especially on social media and these far right pages posting things about grooming gangs, we don't want to see it because they aren't the people really to be well, they're exploiting it basically. It's like, if we're gonna approach this as a problem, we don't really need it to be spearheaded by a bunch of far end political zealots, be it the grooming thing with far leftists or woke intersectional identity politics with the far left. And we talk about the far
a lot of this like bullshit that's been pushed like so aggressively in the last few years is actually having the alternate fucking like result. Because I'm very fucking liberal about a lot of things, like, because I mean, even me and you will disagree on stuff like sometimes, but they, in many ways, like, I'm just gotten so piss sick and fed up of like the what? No, you don't follow every single last like tenet of our like insanity. Well, obviously you're a bigot then. Like, no, I just think you've taken like a sensible argument way too far at this point. Like, way too far. To the point it's actually become kind of authoritarian and bullshit the way you're pushing it.
Well, that's the thing. So with Doctor Who, I think we've seen, again, you'll know way more about this than me, but the new iteration that we're getting, there's all sorts of minority group representation aspects to it, which would normally be fine, but it seems very inorganic, like they're just ticking boxes rather than just casting the right people.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched, for full disclosure, like as a fan of Doctor Who, I watched the first 2 seasons of Jodie Whittaker, and I don't hate her as an actress. I don't even necessarily hate her version of the Doctor per se. It's like certainly not my favorite iteration, but it's not like, oh, I absolutely can't stand her. But like the first season was kind of very middle of the road. It didn't like excel at any point, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as I expected it to be either. Because I'm like, oh shit, we're doing a thing about Rosa Parks. This is going to be the cringiest fucking overly politicized nonsense ever. It's like, well, it kind of was a little bit, but it was mainly just dull.
Yeah.
So it's like there was no episode there that was so exceptionally bad. It's like, right, I can't even watch this anymore because it pisses me off. But like I said, there was no episode that was like, oh, this was a really great episode. I'd like desperately want to see that again. It's like, I watched it, meh. Don't really care afterwards. And then the second season was like, okay, you've gone the wrong way because there's now a couple episodes that are absolute and utter, unadulterated shite. It's like, what the fuck were you thinking with these episodes? Like, Jesus.
Yeah.
And there were no really, really good ones to kind of balance out. It's like, well, we've got a couple of okay ones, then we've got shit like Spyfall, and I don't even know what they were fucking thinking when they did that, and like the timeless child retcon and stuff. It's like, this isn't good writing. This is shit. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I've said in the intro, I don't have a dog in this race because I don't watch this show. But even looking at it objectively, the stuff that we did with the retcons and stuff is an awful idea. It's like massively disrespectful to the source material, and it just has all the hallmarks of critical race theory in there, and to do with it's her turn and all this kind of stuff as well. It's just a bad idea all around. But then when you throw that kind of messaging into it as well, it really turns into something quite toxic. And then they wonder why the fans get up in arms about it.
Well, it's just the way. It's like there are plenty of like strong female characters you could use in Doctor Who to do cool things with that never really got a day to shine in the olden days, because like the attitudes of like the executives, like, oh no, we can't really have, It's like, for example, one of the earlier companions got like kind of removed because she was like a scientist and she was a bit too smart, and it's like, no, we need somebody a bit pretty and a bit like dumber for the Doctor to explain things down to. Yeah, that's like an extreme example, and to be honest, it had a bit of a point to it because the companion is supposed to be like the audience stand-in, so
that makes
you
sense.
kind of want them to be dumb as fuck, so like you can explain what's going on to the audience, kind of thing.
Yeah, makes sense.
But there's like plenty of like strong like female characters you could have like brought back in some kind of new like iteration if you wanted to do something like that. Oh no, it's her turn, she needs the spotlight. It's like, okay, like, well, do something with Romana then or something, like you've literally got a female Doctor Who. That's why she was in the show. She was a Time Lord. She has more or less the same shit as the Doctor. Rather than feminizing the Doctor, why not just have her? Like, I don't really particularly care that you've got a female Doctor because, like, regeneration's a thing. It happens. And at least you've bothered to establish that, yeah, it can be like, they literally don't give a shit about gender, like they can regenerate as whatever. It's like, well, okay, whatever, fine. But at the same time, it's like, it's not really needed.
Yeah. I think because this conversation will go on for a bit, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a break and then we'll come back in part 2. So hang on for a moment.